Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Mireya Solis, Senior Fellow and Night Chair in Japan Studies here at Brookings, and it's a pleasure to welcome all of you for this program this afternoon on Japan's Arctic strategy. Rapid climate change is transforming the economic and geopolitical importance of this region. With ice melting twice as fast in the polar region than elsewhere in the world, the possibility of opening new shipping lanes for international commerce connecting Asia and Europe, and of tapping on the vast stock of natural resources in the region is increasing. The benefits could be substantial, given that the region is rich in fish, minerals, oil, and gas, and the Northern Sea route could significantly reduce travel distance between these two continents, creating a significant competitive edge in maritime transportation. But if the Arctic is a region rich in opportunity, it is also a region where challenges are plentiful. First and foremost, the fact that ice is receding so rapidly in this region creates deep concern about the environmental impact for the Arctic and elsewhere. So, successful stewardship of the Arctic will require a careful balancing of the economic opportunities of resource exploitation and more traffic in the Northern Sea route with the need to promote environmental conservation in a vulnerable environment and to ensure that indigenous people benefit from expanded economic opportunities. But there will be many other challenges ahead. Let me just mention a few. Developing effective contingency measures in case of oil spills, mounting rescue and search operations, sorting out jurisdictional issues over strategic shipping lanes, and delimiting rights over overlapping continental shelves. Just a few challenges ahead. Climate change then has brought many rapid changes on the ground and has also attracted the interest of many countries, non-Arctic countries. And I think it's very interesting to note the arrival of Asia's commercial powers, with 5 Asian countries becoming observer members, acquiring observer status in May of 2013. Countries such as Japan, China, Korea, India, and Singapore have signaled that they have strong interest in the Arctic. Today, we're interested with one of those countries, Japan. Now, Japan's presence in the Arctic is certainly not new. Its environmental research activities go back decades. But it's also true that Japan has stepped up its game in the Arctic. First, by acquiring observer status, as I mentioned before. Second, also in 2013, Japan named for the first time its Arctic ambassador. And just last Friday, Japan released its first national Arctic policy. So you can imagine that we feel very privileged to be able to offer all of you today one of the first discussions of this very important document, Japan's National Arctic Policy, and to discuss, therefore, how Japan sees the range of strategic interests it has in the Arctic and through what strategies can it achieve those objectives. That, in a nutshell, is the essence of the topic for today. And we feel also very honored to have with us the person best qualified to discuss Japan's national Arctic policy. Our keynote will be delivered by Japan's Arctic ambassador, Her Excellency Kazuko Shiraishi. Ambassador Shiraishi is also concurrently ambassador in charge of women, human rights, and human development. As you can imagine, she is very busy with so many responsibilities. She is a career diplomat and joined the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in 1974 after graduating from Sophia University in Tokyo. She has spent significant time in Eastern Europe during her career, and prior to her current appointment, Ambassador Shiraishi was the ambassador of Japan to Lithuania from 2012 to 2015. So please join me in welcoming Ambassador Shiraishi to the stage. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Solis. And ladies and gentlemen, let me express my sincere appreciation to the Brookings for hosting this event and providing me that the role of keynote speaker. I am deeply honored to be able to speak at this internationally or world's renowned think tank. I would like to especially thank to Dr. Mireia Solis and her staffs for their work to realize this event. Today, the article is commanding attention from not only the Arctic region, but also all over the world, including this very city. President Obama visited at the end of August at the state of Alaska, not just to test his survival skills on a reality TV show, but advocate a very important message to international communities at the Glacier Conference. The Arctic is pressing challenge for all of us. It shows us something when both United States President and the United States Secretary of State had dedicated their very busy time to host an international conference on the Arctic. So what makes the Arctic such a hot topic? One answer is that environmental changes in the Arctic have created new economic opportunities and serious challenges for the world. A new shipping route, what called the Arctic Sea Route or a Northern Sea Route or a Northern West Sea Route, is emerging along the northern coast of Russia and Canada due to lessening Arctic ice. As a result, exploitation of the very reserve of energy resources presumed to lie in the Arctic, especially natural gas, is becoming a possibility. On the other hand, impacts of climate changes in the Arctic are being observed more remarkably than any other region. For example, that as the Dr. Solis mentioned, temperatures are increasing at more than twice the rate of global average. In addition, the Arctic climate change has brought about sea level rise and thawing of permafrost. These challenges are extremely serious in the sense that they could impact the entire global environment. As the President Obama underscored in Anchorage, climate change is no longer far-off problem. Climate change is a trend that affects all trends, economic trends, security trends. Everything is impacted. Moreover, scientists point out that the human activities, even those outside the Arctic region, can severely impact Arctic climate change. In dealing with issues concerning the Arctic, we should not consider it merely as a trade-off between protection and development. Rather, it would be beneficial for the entire international community to search for the best way to achieve sustainable use on the basis of accurate understanding with scientific expertise. Upon the recognition, Japan has made significant contribution to the international effort to address Arctic issues by making full use of scientific expertise acquired during more than 50 years of scientific research and observation. Japan's stand toward Arctic, which I just outlined, is echoed by President Obama and Secretary Kerry at the Glacier Conference. President Obama, for example, concluded the conference in Anchorage by emphasizing that we cannot deny science. The government of Japan has outlined its commitment to Arctic issue in its own version of the National Security Strategy released in 2013. The strategy states that Arctic Sea is deemed to have enormous potential for developing new shipping routes and exploitation of natural resources. When it is expected that states concerned work together under relevant international rules, such potential could provide new causes of friction among them. In order to take a step to demonstrate Japan's serious commitment to the Arctic issues, the government of Japan has just adopted last Friday a comprehensive Arctic policy for the first time in the history. Today, I would like to use this occasion to elaborate on the contents of this newly adopted policy. Japan's Arctic policy settles on taking actions on the Arctic strategically with cross-sectional perspectives. Through these actions, Japan seeks to contribute to the international society as a main player to address Arctic issues. Taking these objectives into account, Japan defines following 7 policies. 1. S&T, science and technology. We will make full use of Japan's strengths in science and technology from a global viewpoint. 2. Environment. Japan will give full consideration to the Arctic environment and ecosystem, which is vulnerable and low resilience. 3. International cooperation. We will ensure the rule of law and promote international cooperation in a peaceful and orderly manner. 4. Indigenous people. We will respect the right of indigenous people to continuity in their traditional economic and social foundations. 5. National security. We will pay full attention to security environments in the Arctic. 6. Economic and social compatibility. We will aim for economic and social compatibility with climate and environmental changes. And last, 7. Arctic sea route and development of resource. We will seek possible economic chances for the use of Arctic sea route and for the development of resource. Based on these basic policies, Japan spells out specific initiatives to be taken. First initiative is research and development. While the Arctic climate change has become a common global issue, there still remain many unknowns. Japan strives to examine what is going on in the Arctic and its impact on the global environment through projects like Project Arctic Challenge for Sustainability, one of Japan's research initiatives which was launched in this year. Moreover, Japan plans to establish education and research centers at home and abroad. Japan will connect individual research centers together as a network, propelling cross-cutting actions. The second initiative is international cooperation. Japan has various interests concerning the Arctic as climate change, sea route, and resource development. Japan will engage in constructive discussion such as international decision-making and rule-making on the Arctic, particularly with its scientific expertise. Besides, Japan will strengthen its contribution to the Arctic Council by dispatching even more experts to the Council. This action will underscore the point that expanding role of observers is vital for the future of the AC. I will touch upon this point again later. Sustainable use of the Arctic is the third initiative. In order to realize utilization of the Arctic sea route by Japanese shipping companies and others, Japan calls for the establishment of maritime navigation system to help ships traveling through the Arctic. Japan will also take actions to enhance Japanese economic activities in the Arctic, especially in the area of exploitation of natural resources. In the development of marine living resources, Japan will work with other countries to make a framework for preservation towards sustainable use. Among various multilateral frameworks, Japan attaches the highest importance to Arctic Council. I would like to stress that observers can substantially contribute to activities of the AC by utilizing their strengths. The AC can be an even more effective framework once observers are allowed to play a bigger role. Japan is ready to assume this new challenge. Japan is strongly encouraged by United States chairmanship of the AC, as the United States aim to facilitate engagement between the member states and the observers under the theme of the One Arctic, advocated by Secretary Kerry. In closing, let me touch upon Japan-US cooperation on Arctic. Japan and the US have been already cooperating in the area of scientific research. The International Arctic Research Center, in short, IARC, was established in 1999 in the University of Alaska, Fairbanks, with support from the two governments. Young Japanese researchers from two researchers work with international group from many different countries, including the US, and the IARC has served as a coordination center for Arctic climate change research programs. Japan would like to accelerate strengthening bilateral cooperation through initiatives such as adopting new joint research programs at the IARC, expanding personal exchanges, and enhancing cooperation in research and development in Arctic-related science and technology. Through these initiatives, we would like to elevate Arctic policy as a new pillar of Japan-US cooperation. Japan looks forward to working with the United States to usher in a new chapter of joint endeavor. Thank you very much for attention.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Ambassador Shiraishi. That was an excellent presentation, and I think that we have lots of questions regarding the future of Japan's Arctic strategy. It is certainly such a milestone to have the first ever national policy on this crucial region. And I feel a little bit bad that I'm going to ask about the next challenges, and I'm thinking mostly about implementation. When we think about the Arctic, we're thinking about so many issues are involved. We're thinking about resource exploitation. We're thinking about environment. We're thinking about maritime transportation, national security. And by naming these issues, I think that already I'm beginning to hint that many, many government agencies will be involved in them. And Japan, quite frankly, is known for bureaucratic sectionalism, that bureaucracies have the little turf, and it's very hard sometimes to have horizontal coordination. I also imagine that for Japan to step up its presence in the Arctic, this also requires an investment of resources for the research facilities that you were discussing, perhaps a research ship, a possibility, I don't know, of an icebreaker, if you can let us know what's in the cards on that front. Nevertheless, a lot of resources to make this strategy come alive. So I was wondering if you could please highlight for us what you think are the next steps in terms of coordination so that the strategy is implemented smoothly, and also about the budgetary allocations in a context in which Japan has some constraint in fiscal resources.
Oh, Dr. Solis, you gave me the many questions,
so
and okay, I'm not sure that I am able to respond on all the questions. But let me try to do that my best effort. First of all, coordination among the ministries concerned. Do you have this paper? Yes. This is Japan's Arctic policy, and please pay attention on the bottom. October 16th, 2015, the headquarters for ocean policy. What is the headquarters for ocean policy? This headquarters consists of, led by Prime Minister Abe, and all the ministers of the cabinet. And under this headquarters, there is secretariat. And also, there is a sort of the forum of coordination at the director's level from all the ministries. And talking about, research, and the Ministry of Education and Science has a budget, and as I touched upon that the new project acts, that this new project has already launched from this year. Then Ministry of Education and Science is going to fight against Ministry of Finance to increase the budget for this new project. But this national Arctic policy is sort of that good trend of wind for the Ministry of Education and Science to increase its budget. And with respect to the international cooperation, Ministry of Foreign Affairs is in charge of that. And environment, of course, Ministry of Environment, and also that the sea route the Ministry of that National Ministry of National Infrastructure and the Communication in charge of this sea route issue. But as I told at the beginning, we have regular coordinative meeting of ministers concerned. So we don't think that some conflicts caused by bureaucratic sectionalism. Yes. And you touched upon some icebreaker, and we have no plan. I mean that this Japan's Arctic policy does not mention about the possibility to construct icebreaker. But now we are under consideration about the possibility of research ship, and we don't limit just on the icebreaker. But anyway, our strength, as I told, is that expertise, knowledge, and data acquired by research and observation during more than 50 years. So we would like to contribute to strengthen more and more this strength in science and technology. So we don't see that the icebreaker is the best solution, the measure to increase the strength and our strength. So from the various point of view, we would like to study what kind of measure, constructive measure is the most appropriate for getting our goal.
Thank you so much, Madam Ambassador. I have another question. Going back to a point I think you emphasized a couple of times in your presentation. You mentioned that Japan is ready to play a larger role in its observer status in the Arctic Council. So if you could, and I'm sorry that I usually pack too many questions with one theme, but I'll try to make it fewer questions. But in general, for the audience, for those who may not be familiar with the Arctic Council itself, yes, what role do observer countries play, and in which ways specifically could Japan have a larger say or larger input in what happens in this governance mechanism for the Arctic?
So the Arctic Council consists of 8 countries, 8 Arctic states, namely US, Canada, Russia, and Nordic states, and Nordic 5 states. And then, as you introduced Japan became an observer in the year 2013, Japan participated even before 2013 at workshop or a task force under the Arctic Council. And when talking about observer, our role is just only observing the Arctic Council. That's it. But observers have the right to participate, observers are expected to contribute by using some data or knowledge or expertise in science. We participated in various workshops and task force, such as the work group on Arctic monitoring and assessment. Am I right? And or working group on conservation of Arctic flora and fauna. And in addition to that, we are very much proud that Japanese researcher in the field of especially ocean acidification and black carbon is leading the world. So that, as you are aware, that ocean acidification and black carbon is one of the most difficult problem to tackle with. Then we I am very sure that we can contribute by using this leading expertise to that the International Community Internet Arctic Council in addressing these issues.
Thank you very much. And I think it's interesting that 5 Asian countries, joined the Arctic Council as observers at the same time. And I wonder if that gives an incentive for these Asian countries to coordinate activities, to share notes, to think about joint proposals. Maybe it's too much to think about an Asian caucus, but is there any coordination or dialogue among these observer nations or not?
Talking about the collaboration or coordination under the Arctic Circle and the Arctic, not Arctic, Arctic Circle, we don't have any direct collaboration or coordination among these 5 Asian observers. But we have the various fora on cooperation in science and technology. Recently, that ministers who are in charge of the logistics among 3 countries, Japan, Korea, China, had the conference, and they agreed that to promote the research for that Arctic sea route. So that kind of cooperation is going on, but this is not directly related with the Arctic Council.
Thank you. And I think it's also interesting to note a confluence of events in the sense that this year the United States holds the chairmanship in the Arctic Council, and it's also the year that Japan releases its first national policy on the Arctic. My question is whether the fact that the United States is currently the chair creates a particularly conducive environment for Japan to play a more active role. And you mentioned some initiatives where these 2 countries can cooperate, especially in environmental research. Yes. Is there anything else where you think that these 2 countries could join forces and be more proactive together in thinking about the future of the Arctic?
Okay. During my statement, I told that we Japan expect the bigger role of the observer at the Arctic Council, and the United States showed some intention to consult or discuss about observers' role, and especially that the United States will host that Arctic Council Senior Arctic Officers Conference from 21st to 22nd in this month, the day after tomorrow and 2 days later on. And before, that 1 day before this SAO meeting, that is Senior Arctic Officers meeting, United States will organize for the first time special session on observers' engagement. This is a very good opportunity to discuss about observers' role at Arctic Council. So we appreciate the United States initiative as the chairman in order to discuss about this observer's status.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. So my last question before I turn to the audience, in case there are questions for the ambassador. And I would like then to ask about Japan's interaction with another crucial player in the Arctic, and that is Russia. And we know that Japan-Russia relations are complex. Some of these complications are long-standing. I'm referring to unresolved territorial disputes. Some of them are more recent because of the imposition of sanctions after Russia's actions in Ukraine. But nevertheless, Prime Minister Abe and President Putin have met several times. There was talk at some point that President Putin might visit Japan. According to the media, that's no longer going to happen this year. And therefore, this is a very complex relationship. Some people feel that if there was some breakthrough on the territorial issues, that perhaps this could help untap the potential for economic cooperation, including the Arctic. So given this complex background, my question to you, Ambassador Shirashi, is quite simply, how do Japan and Russia interact in the Arctic?
Okay. The answer is very simple.
Ah, good.
Yes. Yes, there is a difference, for example, with respect to Ukraine issue. But the Arctic is the place for cooperation. So that not only that Japan and Russia, but and the United States and Russia cooperate in the Arctic. Otherwise, the challenges which now the Arctic faces cannot solve it. So the Arctic issues is the issue not only for the one country, but the issues for the global. So that's the reason this the Arctic Council and or other fora in dealing with Arctic issue is the place for cooperation.
Thank you very much. So the ambassador is kind enough. She's made time to take questions from the audience. So I'll ask you to please raise your hand if you'd like to ask a question, to identify yourself, to please be very concise, questions, not comments. And I'll take 2 or 3 at the one round. So I have one hand here, and the lady, and then the gentleman across. So we start. Just the mic, Rusty. Thank you.
Russ Deming at SACE. Thank you very much, Ambassador Shidayashi, for your presentation. My question is the role of the Defense Ministry in Arctic policy. You mentioned national security as one element in Japan's strategy, but when you talked about the Kacho, the director level coordination mechanism, you did not mention the Defense Ministry or the Kaijōjīeitai, the Maritime Self-Defense Forces. Could you explain what the Defense Ministry's role is in Arctic policy?
Thank you. And then we'll go to the lady with the green sweater and the gentleman on the other.
I'm Caitlin Antrim, Rule of Law Committee for the Oceans. I'd just like to confirm that Japan fully supports the rights and obligations established by the Law of the Sea Convention for the continental shelf, exclusive economic zone, and territorial sea international straits of all of the Arctic states.
Thank you very much. And one more question.
Oh, my name is Michał Łuszczuk. I'm a Fulbright researcher from Poland. I'm very, very happy to listen your words about cooperation of Arctic Council observers. I would like to ask you, do you have specific plans for this kind of cooperation between non-Arctic states? Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Shirashi.
Yes. Thank you very much for questions. First of all, role of that Ministry of National Defense. As I told you that this headquarters consists of all the ministries. So Ministry of National Defense is involved in making this policy. But when you look, when you read this policy, that there is no expression or the specific action by Ministry of National Defense. So with respect to the national security, we will pay the attention, the sort of development of the national security the environment. That is that is basically the general direction of this Japan's Arctic policy. Then the UNCLOS issue. Yes. Rule of law is important, most important issue. And Japan, as a maritime state, Japan attaches the importance to that rule of law. So up to that present, the issues in the Arctic, such as the territorial right or the maritime delimitation, were solved peacefully in accordance with international law. Japan wishes that direction should be continued. And then third issue is that some specific project that cooperation among non-Arctic states, and Poland is also observer. Yes, and then Japan and Poland are enjoy the same right as observer, and I told that we don't have a specific collaboration forum among Asian observers. That's the same situation, that we don't have any specific plan or of cooperation or collaboration with non-Arctic states, but we would like to continue close discussion and consultation at the place of the Arctic Council, such as special session on observers' engagement, which will be held tomorrow in Anchorage.
Well, thank you so much, Ambassador Shirashi. This has been a terrific opportunity. I also wanted to mention that we're very, very grateful. The ambassador is so busy that she's going to be here in DC less than 24 hours. She made this trip and was able to share her insights with us today. She was coming from Iceland and actually this afternoon on her way to Anchorage. So we're really fortunate that you're able to make the time today. Please join me in thanking the ambassador for her participation. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you, Ambassador. Thank you so much. Okay, so now we move on to the expert panel, and we have a terrific group of specialists. I would like to introduce them in the order in which they'll make their remarks. And I would like to ask them to please come one by one to make a presentation here at the podium, and then we'll come and sit for a conversation. So first we have Heather Conley, who is Senior Vice President for Europe, Eurasia, and the Arctic, and Director of the Europe Program at CSIS. Prior to joining CSIS, she served as Executive Director of the Office of the Chairman of the Board at the American National Red Cross and as Deputy Assistant Secretary of State in the Bureau for European and Eurasian Affairs. Next will come Taisaku Ikeshima, who is a professor in the School of International Liberal Studies at Waseda University. Dr. Ikeshima is currently an expert member of the Arctic Studies Strategic Committee of the Japanese Ministry of Education, Science, and Technology. And his research interests include the law of the sea, the settlement of international disputes, and polar studies. He's a prolific writer, and actually 2 of his publications caught my eye, and I hope that we hear answers to the questions you pose in those publications. And they are China's interest in the Arctic, threat or opportunity? I want to know what his thoughts are on this. And should Japan's Arctic policy be based on the assumption that the Arctic Ocean is a global commons? And after Professor Ikeshima, we'll have Dr. Aki Tonami, who is a researcher at the Nordic Institute of Asian Studies at the University of Copenhagen. And Dr. Tonami is a specialist in foreign policy and development in Asia, and has written extensively on East Asian states' environmental foreign policy, and is currently working on a book that examines East Asian countries' Arctic policies, which is perfect for these panels. So thank you very much. Heather, if you'd like to come to the stage. Thank you.
Well, good afternoon, and thank you so much for this very kind invitation. It's always wonderful to get a request from a colleague and go to another think tank and talk about the Arctic. We have lots of presentations at CSIS, so it's a great delight to be with you. Thank you. And Ambassador, thank you for your comments. Congratulations on a terrific strategy. For those of us who have been involved either inside government or outside government looking at strategies, we know what an amazing accomplishment it is. And looking at the white paper that the government issued several years ago, we know you've been intellectually wrestling with this complex topic, so congratulations. I have to say I was delighted to hear your comments. First, remarking on President Obama's historic visit to Alaska in August. Indeed, it was historic, and I think placed the Arctic much higher on the U.S. agenda, which is indeed welcome. I thank you for your comments on coordination. If you ever feel a little depressed about Japan's coordination, just come look at how Washington tries to coordinate its Arctic policy. It's extremely challenging and something I think we all are challenged by. And then finally, your comments on observer status and enhancing that role. In some ways, there was sort of a paradox in 2013 in the Karuna Ministerial. On the one hand, the Arctic Council welcomed 6 new states to become observers. At the same time, they restricted observer activities. And that cannot stand. That conundrum has to be resolved, and I'm extremely appreciative that Ambassador Dave Bolton and others at the State Department, the chair of the senior Arctic officials, is wrestling that issue head on. So I've been asked very briefly this afternoon to speak about U.S. leadership in the Arctic, and I thought I would just focus on 2 aspects of U.S. leadership. Of course, the U.S. chairmanship of the Arctic Council, which began in April of this year and extends through until 2017, and then to have just a few moments of reflection about U.S. leadership in science in the Arctic. So very briefly, the 3 overarching goals of the U.S. chairmanship: addressing the impact of climate change in the Arctic, focusing on ocean stewardship and safety, and the third overarching objective is to improve the economic and living conditions of Arctic communities. And I think what's so important, at least in the first basket of issues, addressing the impact of climate change, exactly as the ambassador had noted, we are extremely concerned about permafrost thaw, coastal erosion, looking at the diminishment of sea ice and its impact on what it's doing to the jet stream, how it's impacting the global weather patterns, in addition to potential future global sea level rise. When we look at ocean stewardship, we are extremely concerned about ocean acidification, and certainly Secretary of State John Kerry has taken a leadership role in looking at the impact of ocean acidification, but also looking at ocean safety. And this, again, where Japan's leadership has been much appreciated in the International Maritime Organization and passing a mandatory polar code that allows for stronger regulations of ships as they navigate increasingly difficult sea ice in the Arctic Ocean. And then finally, we cannot forget that 4 million people live in the Arctic. It is their lives. And the impact of all these changes on their lives that must always remain at the center of our policy interests. So let me unpack that a little bit and talk about U.S. leadership in first the impact of climate change. We are very focused, and I think there's terrific alignment between Japan's strategy and the U.S. strategy, particularly expressed in our chairmanship agenda, that looks at short-lived climate pollutants, and that is black carbon. The Arctic Council has formed a task force on black carbon. Certainly was an issue that was addressed at the Anchorage meeting, although not an Arctic Council event per se. It did highlight the impact of black carbon as well as methane release. So again, how do we try to mitigate, to stop these very powerful short-lived pollutants? The other issues, again, fitting perfectly in the Japanese strategy, is looking at how we can work together and enhance our observing and our monitoring networks. How can we work together to detect these pretty profound changes that we're seeing in the Arctic environment, and working towards those early monitoring systems? And again, as I mentioned, ocean acidification, it's particularly concentrated in the Arctic Ocean, and trying to address that as quickly as possible. So again, that leadership in the U.S. chairmanship agenda, certainly focusing on climate change. And taking a look at the second role of leadership, very historically, the United States has been a science power in the Arctic. If you like to see where, budget is power, and in our system we sort of look to where we put our money, where our mouth is, I suppose, this is where the science agenda has been. A very rough sketch looking at 2014. The United States spent somewhere around $1.5 billion on polar science research, whether that expressed through the National Science Foundation, NASA, NOAA. We really do focus on this. But one of the most powerful tools in our toolkit on science is the use of traditional knowledge. For those that live in the Arctic for centuries, we can learn so much from them. So it's not only using 21st century tools of science and research, but also using traditional knowledge. And I see John Farrell in the crowd, so I'm going to do an unsolicited advertisement for the U.S. Arctic Research Commission. They have put forward a very complete document looking at their priorities and goals for the 2015-2016 period. That's a great roadmap for, again, U.S. leadership in science, looking at, again, underscoring the need for better observation, better modeling, data sharing. How do we integrate the information our scientists are generating, and how do we then use that information to help shape policy? And in some ways, you used a wonderful term or phrase about sectoral or silos, as we like to, bureaucratic, I got to use that term, that's bureaucratic sectionalism. That really, this is siloed information. So we have incredible science and information, but it's not crossing into the policy space. It's not helping to shape our policymakers and how they make future decisions. And that's what we need to do, bring those two elements together. Finally, how these two streams intersect, the U.S. chairmanship of the Arctic Council and the U.S. as a science power, is potentially, and we hope, fingers crossed, next year, the Arctic Council will use its framework to conduct a legally binding agreement on international science and research cooperation. How do we marry and integrate all this knowledge? And we certainly hope on the 20th anniversary of the Arctic Council, which will be next year, that we can again highlight science and international cooperation, two issues that have been embedded in U.S. strategic documents and strategies since the 1970s. So it's something that's very much part and parcel, I think, of our leadership. It works very strongly and very well with Japan's strategy, and I think there is incredible opportunities, not only bilaterally to explore intensifying scientific research, but looking how the Arctic Council can do that. And just a closing word or two on geoeconomics and geopolitics in the Arctic. Both wax and wane. So several years ago, you might have been reading a lot of headlines about the race for resources to the Arctic. You might be seeing, gold rush, and there was lots of enthusiasm and interest in economics in the Arctic. Now you're seeing headlines that says, postponing offshore Arctic development, not putting forward leases, ship traffic through the Northern Sea Route down historically, commodity prices down. We're starting to see where this is not a linear trajectory for economics in the Arctic, that our enthusiasm 5 years ago when energy and commodity prices were at an all-time high is not so enthusiastic when they're at an all-time low, or at least 50%. And that has great implications for the Arctic. But just as 5 years ago, geopolitics really hadn't had any impact in the Arctic. It was a space for international cooperation and strengthening of international purpose. Now we see that geopolitics actually has returned to the Arctic as well, as we see Arctic states, particularly Russia, beginning to securitize the Arctic and increasing the opening of airfields and placing special forces and enhancing their nuclear posture in the Arctic. So these forces aren't absent. They change, they reflect times, and our policies have to be flexible and adaptive to these changing environments. But as the ambassador said, it's absolutely correct. The Arctic is a place for international cooperation, but it cannot be taken for granted. That's why we have to strengthen our governance structures at the Arctic Council. Certainly the observers will play an increasingly important role in the future of the Arctic Council for its next 20 years, but also that we can't lose sight that international cooperation cannot be taken for granted. So using science and other tools, hopefully we can leave venues of cooperation open to reduce potentially flares in the geopolitical dimension of the Arctic. So with that, thank you very much. I look forward to our discussion.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Tai Kishima, and first of all, I would like to thank Dr. Solis and then your institution for the kind invitation and I'm very honored and privileged to be here today. Before I start my presentation, I would like to say that it took me more than 12 hours to come over here from Tokyo, and then I'm supposed to speak 12 minutes at maximum, a little bit too much. So I may exceed my time limit for a few minutes, but not more than an hour. Right. Thank you. Well, this is the outline of my presentation. I start with the geographic background of the Arctic, and then I move on to discussing Japan's interests and contributions, and then pick up some major issues in terms of maritime and security matters. And then, before I conclude my presentation, I would like to touch upon a legal framework that governs the Arctic matters. I understand that quite many of you may have been frustrated for not knowing the geographical situation, because it's quite far away from here, and then nobody is very familiar with the geographical situation. This is from the United States Navy Arctic Roadmap. And then quite misguiding, because you can't see the sea ice, floating over the Arctic Ocean. To tell the truth, the Arctic Ocean isn't an ocean, but covered by ice almost all the year. And also sudden small portion along the coastline of the coastal states may see ice melt for a very short period of time a year, maximum 3-4 months per year. And then, so probably not many people, even in this room, know what these lines mean. For example, red lines is called Northern Sea Route along the Russian coast, and then the blue one is called Northwest Passage on the Canadian and US Alaskan coast. And then the central one, green one, is called the Transporter Route that crossed almost the central part of the Arctic Ocean. All right. So keep these geographical backgrounds in mind, and then we'll know better about the following discussion. And Japan may have some interest in many fields, but I pick up some major interest. Among others, when it comes to the Arctic Sea Route, the Northern Sea Route, which means, this red one is more important for Japan as a user state of this sea route. Right. And then major interests include shipping safety and environmental protection. Fishery, particularly we have got unregulated fishing in high seas, that's for its own policy. And Japan is quite well known for scientific observations, scientific survey or research, whatever. And also Japan is notorious for its expertise on environmental protection, technology, and experience. Because Japan has got quite a long history of Antarctic survey, the other side of the Earth. So Japan can make a contribution through cooperation, because Japan is not a coastal state, of course, obviously, but Japan needs to cooperate, work together with other countries, particularly the Arctic coastal states. So there are many types of cooperation, bilateral, multilateral, largely speaking. And then Japan, of course, cherishes its bilateral relationship with the United States and the bilateral alliance system. But when it comes to the Northern Sea Route, NSR, the Japan-Russia bilateral relationship may be more important. And then, as many of you are familiar with the current situation, Japan's got a very complicated relationship with Russia, but we have to take a look at it very carefully. And of course, Japan needs to establish bilateral ties with each one of those Arctic states when it comes to bilateral cooperation. And then, in terms of multilateral cooperation, Japan needs to use multilateral fora or such as Arctic Council and some other mechanism in the international society. But at the same time, Japan must pay attention to the non-Arctic states, such as European and Asian states, who are not yet, or who will not be, or even observer states in the Arctic Council. This kind of outsiders may have certain kind of states in and around the Arctic region. Okay, the maritime issues. Japan, or the Japanese government, adopted the basic plan on ocean policy in 2013, and in this basic plan, Japan also touched upon the Arctic region, and then they listed up some of the important issues. And then this list is not exhaustive, but then just some examples listed here: securing maritime transport, safety, navigation, promotion, research, and survey activities, and these kind of things on the agenda. But these must be dealt with under the law of the sea, including the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, UNCLOS. Japan is a state party to the UNCLOS, so I will come back to this point later. Okay, security issues. The Arctic Council, for example, is not supposed to discuss this matter in accordance with the Ottawa Declaration. But normally, security issues may be split into two types, the traditional one and non-traditional one. What is important in terms of the Arctic region is the latter one, the non-traditional. For Japan's foreign or Arctic policy, the latter type of security issues are more important. That is, human and environment issues and these kind of things. Because now Japan is attracting world's attention in terms of what itself can do under the new security-related legislation and under the kind of pacifist constitution. But at the same time, we must not forget the last question, what they expect Japan to do in terms of security matters, particularly in the latter context. So, of course, Japan has got the strong ties with the United States in the framework of the US-Japan Security Alliance system. At the same time, Japan must not forget what other countries, such as Arctic states, non-Arctic states, and the rest of the world are thinking about Japan's Arctic policy. Now, let's get back to the law of the sea issue. UN Convention on the Law of the Sea is now it's called the Constitution of Maritime Affairs in the World, and particularly Article 234, ice-covered areas, is relevant in a sense. And then that provision is about the coastal states' jurisdiction in terms of marine pollution from vessels, control and prevention, reduction of this type of pollution. So in other words, the coastal states have got a strong jurisdiction and control over marine pollution from vessels. But at the same time, the last phrase is probably also important because coastal states must pay due regard to navigation of other countries. In other words, this provision itself is concerned with the coastal states such as Canada, Russia, and the United States. But this provision strikes balance between the coastal states and the shipping states. Another thing I would like to mention is Article 26 of the UNCLOS, that is charges which may be levied upon foreign ships. Well, no charge may be levied upon foreign ships whenever they use innocent passage through the territorial sea. But when it comes to other charges, only for specific services, I mean, that can be charged. But when it's done, the charging state must keep a non-discrimination approach. For example, Russia, in terms of the Northern Sea route, Russia has got a strong stake, but regulation and implementation must be done with transparency and reasonableness when and if that sea route becomes more international and then becomes a de facto sea route for international use. We never know at this moment, but this kind of process may be necessary for clarification. And the infrastructure development must be done before it becomes in more frequent use. So Japan must need to establish networking with other coastal states. There are some other important agreements that are adopted under the auspices of the Arctic Council in terms of maritime safety and then pollution control. But at the same time, International Maritime Organization, one of the specialized organizations in the UN family, Polar Code, has been accepted and adopted for the last 1 or 2 years. And it's also famous for its mandatory character for both the Arctic and the Antarctic maritime areas. But this Polar Code is mainly for safety and the environment-related matters, and there are some additional requirements in terms of these existent conventions. But what is important for Japan is the second half of this slide, that is, domestic measures must be taken in the future to implement that Polar Code, particularly in terms of shipping. Japan needs to upgrade its requirements in terms of ship design, construction, and so on for its safety and environmental protection. Now, my concluding remarks are the following. First, the rule of law and the law of the sea is, of course, the most important value under the Law of the Sea Convention, as well as some other related agreements. The freedom of navigation, FON, is, of course, among these important rules. But at the same time, UNCLOS strike a balance between the coastal states and the shipping states. So coastal states are allowed to exercise jurisdiction, coastal jurisdiction, within its exclusive economic zone, EZ. At the same time, flagship jurisdiction, flagship countries or states must exercise its jurisdiction and also discharge its own duties under the law of the Constitution, law of the sea. Now, Japan, Arctic policy must reflect these kind of things in a balanced way. Of course, Japan needs to receive whole nation support for its national policy and strategy. But it must pay attention to regional and community interests as well as its own national interest. So Japan's role to play here, I would like to recommend, is to not to just pay attention bilateral or multilateral cooperation coordination within the Arctic Council or some other related fora, but as a bridge, pipe, channel, or conduit between the Arctic Council and the rest of the world, Japan should play a role as a kind of watcher, monitor, or messenger for the community interest or public interest for the sake of the interest of international community. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. My name is Ahi Tanami. Thank you very much for this today's opportunity to present at the Brookings Institution. I'm very honored and privileged to be here. And I was recently in Iceland together with Ambassador Shiraishi to attend the Arctic Circle. And of course, before that, I'm based in Copenhagen, Denmark. So I was pleased, while at the same time a little bit depressed, to be in Washington, D.C. to see blue sky after so many weeks, first time after so many weeks, and very nice, crisp weather. So I questioned whether I should continue working on the Arctic, but at the same time, without having worked on the Arctic, I wouldn't have been here. So thank you very much. So I'll talk about Japan's Arctic policies, and my assignment here is to look at it from environmental research and climate change perspective. So if we go back a little bit in history, the 1987 Murmansk speech by the Soviet Union President Gorbachev includes 6 proposals. And one of the proposals was the coordination of scientific research in the Arctic. Therefore, the new Arctic after the Cold War had scientific research at its core, we can say. And this was followed by the establishment of the International Arctic Science Committee, IASC. And in the same year, Japan established the Arctic Environmental Research Center, which then eventually becomes part of the National Institute of Polar Research. And in 1991, Japan joined the IASC as the first Asian nation and established the research station in New Ulsan in Svalbard. The most important actors in Japan's scientific research is, of course, the Ministry of Education, Culture, Sports, Science, and Technology, mixed, which is in charge of all the scientific programs as well as the supervising ministry of the 2 research agencies, which are National Institute of Polar Research, NIPR, and Japan Agency for Marine Earth Research, Earth Science and Technology, JAMSTEC, and National Institute of Polar Research. Very much focus on terrestrial fields of research and is the member organization of the IASC. Is in charge of research stations in New Ulsan and Svalbard, in collaboration with the Norwegian Polar Institute and research stations in Fairbanks, Alaska, which Ambassador Shiraishi mentioned earlier. Japan Agency for Marine Earth Science and Technology very much focuses on marine research, and in 1998 they carried out the first research cruise with the oceanographic research vessel Mirai, which is the vessel that is under discussion for upgrading at the moment, in collaboration with the United States. So we can see here that Japan's scientific research or engagement in the Arctic is very much inspired by the Antarctic Treaty System that Professor Ikeshima mentioned. At its core, Antarctic Treaty System, of course, has the peaceful use of the region and freedom of scientific investigation and international cooperation. And it is indeed in 2009, which was the 50th anniversary of the Antarctic Treaty System, that Japan formally announced its application to be an observer to the Arctic Council here in Washington, D.C. And unfortunately, Japan's application to observer status was turned down a few times. And during this period, Japan decided to boost up its scientific research. In 2010, Ministry of Education obtained programmatic funding to start comprehensive Arctic research, and started off with what's called GREEN, Arctic Climate Change Research Project, that ran between 2011 and 2015. And the biggest purpose of this program was to integrate various scientific researchers related to the Arctic. And that was because, by comparison to the Antarctic research, which Japan has a longer history with, where literally and physically all the researchers have to be on the same boat to go to the destination, it was much cheaper. It's cheaper in comparison. For Arctic research to be present in the Arctic and conduct their research individually. And it has 39 institutions and had approximately 300 researchers. The Arctic Challenge for Sustainability project, which was just announced this year, a few months ago, is a continuation of this GREEN project. And it has a similar aims such as understanding climate changing and so on and so forth. But what differentiates very much this program from the predecessor is that it has an element of analysis of socio-economic impact, communication with stakeholders, international cooperation, etc. And this was inspired by more European approach towards scientific cooperation or scientific program in the polar region. But overall, the issue of climate change lies very much in the center of these Arctic research programs. So what about Japan's climate policy? We can see that the primary aim of the Japanese Arctic engagement is repeated many times that protecting and understanding the Arctic environment is the primary objective. And Midori Kagawa Fox, who's a researcher on Japanese environmental ethics and particularly global environmental policy, pointed out that the climate change policy of Japan is very much a part of Japan's global environmental policy from the 1990s. And Japan takes three strategies in forming and implementing this global environmental policy. And the first one is the collaboration with Japanese big businesses. And this is also done through an allocation of official development aid. And in doing so, the promotion of environmental, or what we know as green technology, is very crucial. And there are two purposes of this Japanese global environmental policy as well as climate change policy. One is a diplomatic purpose. As I mentioned earlier, this started around the time when Japanese economy started to decline after the bubble burst, and so Japan always has an aspiration to become a world leader in some areas. So finance was not really an option, and of course, military contribution is out of the question. So environmental issues was considered as an area that Japan can and should excel in international community. And the second purpose was to help domestic industry by creating a favorable environment for the domestic industry through official development aid. So that is sort of the overall overview of the Japan's Arctic policy as well as climate policy. But when I talk about the future, it's interesting to pay attention to how domestic ecological politics may or have and interfere with Japan's environment-related external policy. And one good example is the recent Australia versus Japan, the ICJ's court ruling on halting Antarctic whaling. And Morikawa, the spelling's incorrect, sorry. Morikawa, who's written a book about Japan's whaling policy, said, I quote, "Japanese government allowed the issue to take on magnitude and significance far beyond its actual importance." So, and therefore, and along the way, with so many actors involved, this whaling issue has become, or the continuation of whaling for Japan has become a national goal and also a matter of national pride. So one can say that Japan very much used a whaling issue as an external tool to achieve certain goals in the domestic political arena, whether rightly or wrongly. Amongst the Japanese people, there's no formation of this kind of narratives on the Arctic yet. I'm very much interested in this kind of narrative formation, and I was flipping through a TV channel yesterday, and then I just came across a program called Alaska: The Last Frontier, and it was very interesting to see how American people have sort of identify themselves and resonate themselves towards this Arctic state or Alaska. Anyway, so there's no narratives on the Arctic yet, but it could be that it might be forming in the coming years. And another thing is that there are two parliamentarian leagues on the Arctic. One is called the Parliamentarian League of Arctic Security, which is headed by Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. It's non-partisan, but it existed for a while and it's not so active lately. The other one is called the Parliamentary League of Arctic Frontier Study, which is headed by former Justice Minister Yoko Kamikawa. And it has about 10 members, I hear, and it's been active in influence in policy making. And not all of them, but definitely this league has attracted more slightly right-leaning parliamentarians who are members of the Nippon Kaigi or the Shinto Seiji Renmei. So as I conducted interviews, there are no clear signs that they're going to be nationalistic all of a sudden, but there is a potential. So that's an interesting area to pay attention to. The summary of the Japan's Arctic policy, and particularly in science and scientific research and climate change, is that there's a strong belief in science and technology. And climate change issue or global environmental policy is perceived as an area for Japan to be a world leader. And lastly, the number's incorrect, the possibility of domestic politics interfering with global Arctic policy. Thank you very much.
Great. So let's continue, and now it's a chance to have a conversation among the panelists and then to bring the audience for their questions and comments. And I have first a question that I would like to address to all of you. I very much appreciated Heather's point that economic interest in the Arctic comes and goes, that geopolitics come and goes as well. But in the current juncture, I would like to ask all the panelists, what are your thoughts regarding the possibility that geopolitics may indeed spill over in the region? And given some of the remarks that were made, it seems like the Arctic Council might not be the framework to deal with hardcore security issues. So there might be a gap in the governance structure and current climate of interaction between the two countries. And I'm thinking not just Russia, but if Professor Ikeshima could also go back to his paper, China, Threat or Opportunity.
He wants you to answer that question.
I'm not forgetting. So what do you think will be the influence of geopolitics in the broader governance of the Arctic at this juncture?
Well, as you could probably tell from my earlier comments, I don't subscribe to the theory that the Arctic is an exceptional region which will be forever immune to geopolitical spillover. I think we've already begun to see some of that spillover. Our task is to make sure that it doesn't harm international cooperation in the Arctic, but not to sort of turn a blind eye and say it cannot happen here. And I think it leads perfectly into your second question about security. So when the Arctic Council was created in 1996 at the insistence of the Americans, we could not talk about security in the Arctic because if you talked about it, you were trying to militarize the Arctic. So there was this circular conversation. Don't say it because it might be, so let's not say it. Well, now we do have to talk about security. We're talking about security, but some argue soft security, which is search and rescue, oil spill response and prevention. And I always say to that, look, anything in the Arctic is hard to do, whether that's search or rescue, whether that's oil spill response. So what's happened, the Arctic Council members have used the framework of the organization, just not the organization itself, to create 2 legally binding agreements, which you noted in your presentation, the International Search and Rescue Agreement and the Oil Spill Response. But they don't have an institutional framework to even implement those 2 agreements. So what's been created as of this month, the Arctic Coast Guard Forum, which was very much sort of a U.S. idea that the Russians came on board, as well as the other Arctic Council members. And so this body is created outside of the Arctic Council to implement 2 agreements that the framework was used. And then you add on top of that the creation of the Arctic Economic Council, which was formed this year, and that's also outside the Arctic Council. So the 2 issues that impact the Arctic the most, in my view, economics and security, are outside of the Arctic Council. So that's a governance conundrum. How do we bring those 2 streams of thought? They don't have to be naturally, organically in the Arctic Council, but there has to be a way for the information to flow. And so we can't be afraid to talk about it, because my concern is we've sort of banned security from the discussion. We now actually have created a problem because we're searching for a forum to have the conversation. And my final thought, and this is something that came out in our new report looking at the Russian Arctic, what we've seen over the last 12 to 18 months is that the Russians have performed SNAP military exercises in the Arctic. They've turned off their military transponders when they fly into airspace. We have to get everyone back to a code of conduct that, you certainly have the right to do this, but let's notify exercises. Let's make sure there aren't misunderstandings. So we have to come back to some sort of framework, and right now we're searching for that framework.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yes. Some people like talking about security issues, geopolitics in terms of all the areas of the world. And then, I don't know their aims, but in my opinion, in terms of the Arctic security or something, I also stressed in my presentation that the Arctic is not for this kind of, very hard military security matters. But we should more talk about non-traditional security issues such as search and rescue, as you said, and marine pollution and these kind of things. Of course, outside the Arctic Council framework, some people like talking about security issues, and then military people quite fond of discussing the possibility or risk or whatever, because but I may be criticized for my kind of a naive sense, but I'd like to reserve the Arctic area for only for peaceful purposes, so that the maintenance of peace and security in the region would be, for the time being, kept like the Antarctic area. But to tell the truth, everyone knows that below the ice-covered sea, there are lots of submarines and these kind of things are kind of open secret. Everyone knows that there are, even during the Cold War era, the North Pole or the Arctic Ocean is the, a hot zone or space where both the United States and Russia, or the former Soviet Union, are, meeting head to head. But for the time being, the people in the region, the indigenous people, and all those who are living, all those people live quite peacefully, and then security matters are not really so important for them. So I'll be a bit more optimistic, even though we should always talk about something that might happen and that might kind of become risk. Well, this is what I want to say.
Thank you very much. Tonami-san, any thoughts?
Yes. I think the development of other mechanism, or forum other than Arctic Council, is particularly interesting and important in this matter. And as I mentioned earlier, I was attending Arctic Circle Assembly, and this was formed with an initiative of President of Iceland, Grimson, and his message from the beginning was that everyone should be included in the Arctic, non-Arctic or Arctic. And I think when it was first organized, many Arctic states or the participants from Arctic states were suspicious, but it was, from my personal view, it was particularly very Nordic approach in the sense that rather than not to talk about it, let's bring everything out on the table and talk about it honestly and openly. And so there's no limit on discussion on security matters or geopolitics matter at the Arctic Circle. And every year the panels on Arctic security attracts many audiences. So the same goes with Arctic Frontiers, which both of them are included in Japan's comprehensive Arctic policy, that Japan would continue participating. So it's of course it would be best that the Arctic stays as a peaceful place as it has been, and then I hope it would be the same. I'm sure it would be the same, but I think it's still important to have somewhere, as Heather rightly mentioned, that we maintain a venue to somehow let the air out instead of pretending that's not happening.
Thank you very much. So now let me shift gears and go from geopolitics to questions of identity. And what I'm thinking was triggered by Professor Ikeshima's comment about a whole-of-nation support for an active and engaged Arctic policy. Clearly, the United States and Japan are very different here in the sense that the United States is an Arctic coastal state and Japan is not. So for Japan, the Arctic is far more remote than for the United States. But I may say that for many people in the United States, the Arctic does feel remote. And there is perhaps a lack of an identity of the United States as an Arctic nation. And there's been a recurring theme in this conversation this afternoon. We're talking about Japan, but I'm sure it's clearly so for the United States, about resources that need to be committed. So I wonder, just for the purpose of triggering a conversation, whether sometimes the policy may not be ahead of the public in terms of thinking, perhaps in visionary terms, about how we deal with the Arctic issues, but having to bring on board the publics, because at the end of the day, in both countries, there are fiscal constraints. So how do you think about this issue, about countries that want to play a larger role in the Arctic, but perhaps do not identify as Arctic countries? How do you solve that? Or what are the strategies to get at that, cultivating the domestic base of support for that engagement?
It's a great question. The United States has an extremely weak Arctic identity, particularly in the lower 48. Now, obviously, the state of Alaska knows it and feels it every single day. But that has been one of our challenges, and I think Senator Lisa Murkowski, senator from Alaska, has said this repeatedly and purposely. Until we start thinking of the Arctic as a national issue, not just an Alaskan issue. So if we talk about infrastructure, we're not talking about a state earmark to help it. We're talking about something for the nation in support of the nation's development. We're never going to get where we need to go as far as a long-term vision, whether that's for infrastructure, economic development, or preserving, conserving this very pristine and fragile environment. So we have an enormous amount of work to do. And as I mentioned, President Obama's visit was a big step in the right direction. Never had a U.S. president spent 3 days in Alaska. The joke from Alaskan Governor Walker was most presidents refuel their plane and keep going over Alaska. They don't stay. And a 3-day visit, even going to Kotzebue, going into the Arctic Circle, was really tremendous. But it doesn't alleviate the problem of, exactly as you're right, we can write all the most wonderful strategies in the world, and we have written a lot, until you start making the hard choices on budgets and decisions. So until, at the end of most at the beginning of U.S. strategies, we have to reaffirm that we are an Arctic nation. It's to remind ourselves we are an Arctic nation, we are an Arctic nation. At the bottom of the strategy, it says, after wonderful words, and there will be no extra budget allocated, you'll just have to use your resources, which after pages and pages of wonderful, wonderful strategy, it basically says, yeah, you have to make this do and a budget. And surely everyone in Washington looks at their budgets, they're like, well, we don't need one more unfunded mandate. So this is what's so important about the White House issued a new executive order in January. They created a new coordination mechanism. We're trying to get our hands around this, where the White House is really that message about budgeting. We're going to have to start putting money to it. And for many of us that follow this issue, the most exciting announcement President Obama made was that he said the magic words about an icebreaker, that we may be building an icebreaker in the future. And that message was actually to the Office of Management and Budget to say, get moving, guys. We've got to get this budget going. So we're getting there, but it is far behind. Russia, Canada, extremely strong national identities. They're putting forward procurement plans. They're moving forward with economic development. We're still not so sure. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, Japan hasn't got enough budget for Arctic project, but Japan as a non-Arctic state, maybe a good kind of player to take part in discussion in the framework of the Arctic Council. But you see, you may see lots of ups and downs in terms of this kind of fever about North Pole or the development of the new maritime routes or the new resources, oil and gas. Well, there are some ongoing projects in terms of offshore drilling of oil and gas, but when it comes to the Northern Sea route, it's only still a kind of possibility, one of the possibilities that may be feasible in, I don't know, 20 years, 30 years in the future. So at this time, mass media are quite eager to accelerate this kind of conversation in nationwide. But Japan is still the basic stage to, first of all, we have just adopted some own policy, something like, but most of the cases, the scientists, natural scientists have got a long history for its own achievements in the field of scientific research, observation, and technological development, and so on. But at the same time, there are some new kind of so-called stakeholders, such as China and some other, newly rising powers and states, and they may be a kind of new players who will need us to discuss this issue most seriously. But I'm quite optimistic about these newcomers or new players because, well, in my previous articles, I mentioned that these newcomers or new stakeholders are not the kind of troublemakers, but a new kind of opportunities for those who want them to join to develop the area. Of course, the main principle of the Arctic Council, for example, is the sustainable development in the region. So as far as their activities and all the things are within this fundamental principle, or within the framework of fundamental principle, they are, in a sense, welcomed by some of Nordic states and others. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you. As I mentioned in the presentation, I'm very much interested in this, the forming of the narratives, bottom up and also top down. And China, for example, identified itself as a near Arctic state. And when it was first released, I think the reaction amongst the public in the Arctic states was really. But now, as a few years went on, it is more accepted. So it's interesting that kind of top-down identity of a state, in a way, somehow becomes naturalized as it is enforced by the bottom-up identification of people through media or through visiting the region, etc. Enforces itself. And when it comes to Japan, it is fortunate that we do have a group of parliamentarians who are reasonably powerful and influential, who do see a genuine stake in protecting the environment in the Arctic. So the top-down narrative or identity is already there. So it's for the Japanese public to see that it is important for Japan to be engaged in the Arctic for global environment and climate change.
Great. So let's bring in the audience with questions. Please raise your hand if you have a question and identify yourself. And there's someone with microphones, right? Oh, there she is. Thank you. We have this gentleman here, and you had a question, sir, and then here. So we'll come to you.
Hi, I'm John Farrell from the Arctic Research Commission. I have a science question. Japan is expressing great interest in greater participation in the Arctic Council as an observer. And in science, there's a task force on scientific cooperation. And Japan has been as an observer at these meetings. So I'm curious, given the power that Japan has as a scientific entity, what would Japan like to see in some kind of agreement on scientific cooperation in the Arctic Council?
Thank you. And then I'll take one more. Yes.
Thank you very much. My name is Hiroaki Wada. I'm Japan's Mainichi newspaper. Thank you very much for a very interesting presentation. My question is about your view on this Japanese government decision to adopt this comprehensive Arctic policy. And I hope that if Ambassador can answer my question too. But anyway, my question is about the motivation and your perception of the motivation of the Japanese government in introducing this at this juncture. Do you think it has anything to do with growing concerns in Japan about Russia and China, especially China's move in maritime domain in South China Sea and East China Sea? Do you think that kind of concern is affecting the Japanese government decision to make this policy and sending some kind of message to the world that they are also making some inroads in this area too? Thank you.
Okay, one last question in this round. That gentleman with the next to the camera.
I'm Libo Liu, Voice of America. I have a question for Ms. Tanami. You just came back from Iceland. My understanding is that Foreign Minister of China made a presentation via video. Was his message well received, or was received with a lot of skepticism given China's position in South China Sea and East China Sea? Thank you.
All right, so when we mix the ordering, which we have, Tanami-san, would you like to go first?
Sure. Thank you for the questions. I'm not myself a natural scientist, and I don't attend working groups myself, so this is just my personal observation after talking to scientists. And you might have to, I think you benefit from contacting them directly, and then they'll be happy to share their views on what they can do and what they would like to contribute to. At the moment, I got the impression that they are a little bit puzzled what they are expected to do, because they are just observers, and they're only allowed to participate in working groups. And then it's rather difficult to find the right balance of when to be more proactive and where to know their place, so that they are not perceived as, you don't know anything about the Arctic, why are you saying that? They would like, while at the same time things that they think that they are expected to do, such as black carbon, is as a scientific research itself is not the most, let's say, intriguing or enlightening, some researchers think. So also finding the balance of something that contributes to discovery of new knowledge and finding the practical solution to environmental issues or problems that is happening in the Arctic. As to the foreign ministers of China's video, unfortunately my flight was a little bit delayed, so I couldn't see the video myself. But I think the only comment I heard was that the delegation did a really impressive presentation of their scientific research and their achievements. And they were, the audience were generally speaking very impressed how much Chinese scientific research has advanced in such a short period of time.
Any comments on the question?
Yes, about Arctic Council's participation. I mean, observers are, I don't know how expected they are, generally speaking, because some European observers are not really so how to say, eager to attend every single session of the working group. I received the information about this kind of attendance ratio or participation eagerness. Japan and Great Britain or UK, these two are at the top of the list who attend very regularly, almost all the working group sessions and these kind of sessions. But other observer states are not really so. I mean, I don't have a concrete number, but I also said the same thing in the international conference that took place a half a year ago in Toyama. And then quite many people laughed at it because after you got the title or status as an observer state, and then you attained your kind of goal, you have your seat at least in the diplomatic fora. So maybe in terms of Arctic diplomacy, your presence in this kind of international conference may be more important than what you do or what you expect to do or what you can do. But in terms of Japan's participation, it's got long expertise and a long tradition. They're well-known, established techniques or whatever in terms of environmental protection and this kind of scientific data and so on. So we have good relationship with Nordic countries and some other Arctic states. So these are particularly important for Japan and the Japanese government to participate in all those Arctic Council meetings. Thank you.
Just two quick comments. I think generally on observers, the last 2 years, when particularly the Asian countries joined, there was a lot of confusion, sending diplomats to scientific working groups. Whoa, that didn't work out. Okay, we got to figure out who to send. We have to figure out how we can contribute. And John, it gets to your point of, so when we ask observers, what do you want? They're still figuring that out. And that's part of it's an evolving process. But that also comes to why strategies like this are so important. Because a country itself has to ask, well, what do we think is important? Where do our resources, our time, our energy, our expertise have to be placed? And I think the timing of this strategy is so important because it helps answer those questions. This is what we're interested in. This is what we're going to put our talent, our treasure behind. And I think, as I said, I've seen the evolution of Japan's strategy towards the Arctic in earlier white papers, in thinking through this. It's been thoughtful. It's been collaborative. That's exactly what we want. And I would tell my colleagues in Beijing, we would love to see China's formal written strategy on the Arctic. Because when we don't have a formal written strategy or even a white paper, all we do up here is guess. We read comments and we go, ooh, near Arctic state, what does that mean? Or when we see research vessels and we see a lot of economic activity, we all get excited and go, ooh, what does that mean? And what does that footprint look like in Iceland and Greenland? And so we're going to fill a vacuum, and we'll probably fill it incorrectly. That's why it's so important for governments to be very transparent. I will tell you, Arctic Council states, they're on their second and third strategy because there's been so much change, so much dynamism. You have to update this thing. You have to enhance your budget. So, as I said, not that I'm don't produce a strategy for the sake of producing a strategy, but it really helps signal transparency, and it communicates to others exactly what we anticipate. And I want that transparency in the Arctic because that's how we avoid misunderstandings or misperceptions.
Excellent. More questions? I have in the back and then in the front. Yeah, the gentleman with the hand up, and then we'll come to the front for these other questions.
Thank you all very much. Very informative. I had to absent myself for about 30 minutes, so I will watch it again on the archive of the live stream. So I may have missed one of the questions I'm about to ask. I'm a lawyer, semi-retired, Lauren Hershey. I had once been a guest scholar here in the economic policy arena, so I might be the wrong person coming to the questions about economics and dollars and cents. A couple of questions. Heather, you mentioned $1.5 billion being expended for scientific research. I think that was for one fiscal year, yeah. Or was that a cumulative amount? And then what does that trend line look like over a period of time? And to what extent is there enhanced collaboration with, let us say, Japan or others who are participating? And related to that, will there be a permanent or a set of new permanent scientific bases set up on the Arctic perimeter, if you will, along Canada, Alaska, let alone other participants? Second question under dollars and cents, expanding the fishing stocks, I don't know enough about marine life, but as the ice recedes, does that mean fishing stocks, it's kind of a scientific question, will be expanding into new waters and expanding their populations, or are these pre-existing populations of fishing stock that might be exploited, if I might use that word? And the third question is about icebreakers. We're deficient. I've heard that. I heard some comments earlier from you, Heather, and from one of the Japanese representatives. How long will it take for the U.S. to get one? What's the delivery date? How sophisticated? And will there be collaboration again with Japan or another coastal ally? Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's a full agenda. So we have one more question, and then I'll let the panelists. All right, this gentleman here, and then last round of answers. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mike Smith from the British Embassy. Firstly, thank you for your presentations, and also to my Japanese colleague for recognising the UK's work as an observer state. Certainly, we would share your views of wishing to see the observer nations developed over time. My question actually is for Heather, but please, anyone else comment if you see fit. Also, it's about security. I think it's quite remarkable that the Arctic Council has been incredibly successful at keeping security matters out of their agenda. But equally remarkable that the Arctic has not been used as leverage against other global security concerns. And obviously I'm thinking about some of the current issues with regard to Russia. If I could ask firstly, with the renewed interest in Arctic issues here in Washington, whether you sense there's a greater appetite to impose a cost on Russia through the Arctic agenda as it's currently seen. And second to that, whether the Arctic Council, do you believe, is configured sufficiently to be adaptable should that occur in the future?
All tough questions at the end. So who would like to go first?
Well, how about because I had a few directed at me, I'll swat them away and then let my colleagues finish up. So absolutely, I think that the trend line here is enhancing international scientific cooperation because it's a force multiplier. I think the U.S. budget, and John and others can speak to where we are budget-wise. I think the U.S. chairmanship has obviously focused our attention. The fact that the president's visit and the focus on climate change, we need the best science to help us understand these profound changes and challenges. So I think there's a laser-like focus. It's no accident that the chair of this White House Arctic Executive Steering Committee is John Holdren, who heads our Office of Science and Technology Policy. Science is where our priority is. So, but I see where it's leveraging international collaboration, data sharing, so we can maximize this. So I certainly see that trending continuing. On the fishing stock question, again, anecdotally, and this is where we need more science to help us understand. So the 5 Arctic coastal states, I call this preventive diplomacy at its best, agreed on a fishing moratorium in the Central Arctic, of which there are no fish there right now. But it's anticipated that as waters warm, those fishing stocks may migrate north. We're seeing that anecdotally already. In the Barents Sea, the cod stocks are certainly shifting. That's why we have to get the best science to make the best decisions about where not to fish or where we can responsibly fish. So that's a huge area. Icebreakers, my favorite topic, thank you very much. So I'll run through that door that's been opened for me. So the United States has not built an icebreaker in our country for approximately 30 years. So this is a great journey and adventure we're embarking on, if we fully embark on it. Even if today, if we were to decide to build a heavy icebreaker, it would take probably 10 years for that to be completed and delivered. So we have an interim problem. Right now we have what I call 1.5 icebreakers. We have one heavy icebreaker, the Polar Star, which is pretty much dedicated to Antarctica, to maintaining the we can break through the research station there. And then we have the Healy, which is a medium-strengthened research vessel. So certainly the thinking about research vessel, but it's sort of a hybrid. It can do certain other tasks as long as it stays within the parameters of its ice strength. And so the Coast Guard recommends strongly that the United States needs 3 heavy and 3 medium icebreakers. The price tag for one heavy icebreaker could be as much as $1 billion. So you could understand this is a big strain on a budget that's already under great strain. Where the Coast Guard is thinking about interim solutions to leasing, but bringing in certainly the best technology in the world, which and see that strong collaboration, whether that's with Canada, Finland, some of the other Asian actors. So more to come on that. Look at the FY17 budget, and you'll see how ambitious the administration will be, or maybe how not ambitious they will be. So stay tuned. Great question. On security, the Arctic has already been impacted by the shift in geopolitics. Sanctions target Russian Arctic energy production in the future technology, which required ExxonMobil to move itself out of the Kara Sea. So it hasn't been immune. And if you look at how important the Arctic is to Russia, 20% of its GDP comes from the Arctic, 22% of GDP. Its strategic nuclear deterrent, the Northern Fleet, is in the Arctic. It is modernizing and certainly has a very ambitious economic development program, as well as I think, a changing security picture for the Arctic that we have to understand what that means. I think, I call it the 60-40 rule. That's my analytical sense, that 60% of what Russia is doing is understandable for its ambitious economic plan along the Northern Sea route. We do need search and rescue capabilities. We do need presence, because if an accident happened, no one has the capabilities to get there. But 40% of it is absolutely unexplained. You can't tell me how a snap military exercise involving 45,000 Russian forces, air, land, and maritime component, has anything to do with Arctic economic development. And that's what we have to get our arms wrapped around. The security architecture is in the Arctic. The U.S. missile defense architecture is in Thule Air Force Base in Greenland, Fort Greely in Alaska. Again, the Russian Northern Fleet in Murmansk, it's there. So we have to just build a cooperative framework to make sure no misunderstandings, that we are transparent with one another, because we don't want to trip accidentally into something where we think a snap exercise is something else, and then we start moving, and that would be the greatest travesty.
Wonderful. Any
yes.
comments?
Just an additional comment on fishing and then Russia. About the fishing stocks, I mean, a couple of months ago, Mr. Kerry stressed in his speech that non-regulated fishing is an urgent issue in Arctic high seas, and then concerned states need to talk and to implement something for the rainy day in future. But we will see. At this moment, we don't know. But the UNCLOS and some of the related agreements may be applicable even in ice-covered sea. And then about Russia, Japan is now implementing a kind of economic sanction over Russia in accordance with Western agreements after the Ukraine crisis. Now, I once asked some of my colleagues who are engaged in JOGMEC, Joint offshore drilling projects somewhere else in Russia and in offshore coast of Greenland. But that person said that the impact itself is not really serious in terms of offshore drilling of natural gas and oil. But some other Western banking companies may be suffering from that kind of economic sanctions. I don't know why, but the economists will say in this way, not a direct impact upon the project itself, but for banking companies suffering. Thank you.
Very much. Yes, about security. Of course, I am based in Denmark, so I pay attention to Nordic countries, and Denmark has recently released an Arctic policy paper, a strategy paper. If I'm not certain of the official name, but the title went, and the subtitle says "Security, Economic, and Climate," if I remember correctly. And so the security is the most important element for Denmark of the Arctic. And Norway has recently said the Arctic is the most important region for Norway. And of course, there's a discussion of Sweden considering joining NATO. So these Nordic countries are definitely looking at the security issue of the Arctic in relation to Russia, and whether it's going to be talked directly and formally at the Arctic Circle, Arctic Council, I'm not certain. But for those countries, there's probably other mechanism to discuss. And about fishery, recently Russia announced the banning of net fishing in a Sakhalin area, which is expected to damage the economy of Hokkaido Prefecture, which is the most northern island of Japanese archipelago. So. And the Russian says that it is not related to the sanction after economic sanctions after Ukraine crisis, but questions remains whether that kind of direct bilateral relations and of fishery, which is of vital importance to Hokkaido economy. Yes, and so it would be interesting to see how this pan-Arctic discussion on fishery would be perhaps a little bit less in your face to Japan if it was more done multilaterally rather than directly from Russia towards Japan.
Thank you so much. It's been a terrific discussion. Please join me in thanking the panelists and also Ambassador Shiraisi once again.